We are officially less than 48 hours away from the kickoff of round two of the college football playoff, which happens Wednesday when Ohio State, the Buckeyes, the defending national champions, take on the number 10 seed of Miami Hurricanes. That'll be 7:30 on Wednesday. I think at this point, as we're down to 8 teams from 12, there's, I would say, 7 teams in the playoffs that have shown that they have 7 teams that have at one point this season shown that they have what it takes to win the whole thing. And I think the one team that hasn't shown that is Miami. They've shown flashes of greatness, I'll give them that, but I would say not to the level that makes them a threat to win the national title. Ohio State, on the other hand, the favorites to win um, the whole national title. They started the season as favorites, I believe, and they're still the favorites now. They've obviously had an unblemished season, entirely up until they went against Indiana, obviously in the Big Ten title, which they lost in a nail biter that had their kicker made that one field goal towards the end of the game, they might have won that game. Maybe they would have still lost, whether it was regulation or OT. But they're definitely still in the title for the national title. They're Ooh, did I even say that right? They're definitely still in the conversation for the national title. I think this is going to be a very defense heavy game. The fact that Miami only notched 10 points and it took them until the final minutes of the game to notch 10 points against a team that I think is a fraud in Texas A&M, because Texas A&M played the entire bottom half of the SEC. Let me repeat that. The entire bottom half of the SEC up until their game against Texas. That's why they were undefeated. Had they not done that, they would definitely not be undefeated. And then Texas exposed them. I think, they lucked into the way they had their schedule. They lucked their way into the playoffs, and Miami got them. And but I think that just to score only 10 points against a team that South Carolina scored, I think it was 30 points again in the first half of that game last month. That's not impressive. If you can't even succeed at scoring, I would say 20 plus points against Texas A&M, you're not even going to get into double figures against Ohio State. And they, again, only 10 points, right? And they were scoreless at the half. Not only that, Carson Beck is vulnerable to mistakes, right? He threw for 4 picks against Louisville, which lost them that game earlier this season. And Ohio State has, by pretty much every metric, the number one defense in the country. I think it's yards per game, points per game allowed. Um, I think maybe scoring defense as well, although don't quote me on that. But definitely, as far as yardage, and definitely as far as yardage, and I think in a few other metrics, the main ones, if you go look up the college football stats, I just looked it up yesterday. They're the number one defense in the country, and I don't see, with the way Miami played in the last round and with the way Carson Beck is prone to mistakes, from what we've seen from him in previous seasons at Georgia, I don't think that they have what it takes to score beyond a field goal in this game. I don't think they will score a touchdown. You're going up against the best safety in college football and Caleb Downs, premier other pieces on their defense such as Arvell Reese. I don't, I just don't see how on earth Miami is going to survive in this game. I think it's going to be a defense heavy game. I mean, Miami is also a team that their forte is their defense. They're, I think, number 4 in the country in sacks per game. So, Ohio State's going to have to watch out for that. But Ohio State also has a good O line. And Ohio State has the tools, unlike Miami, to counter such a great defense. They have somebody like a Jeremiah Smith, of course. They have Carnell Tate. Julian Sain was a Heisman contender and a Heisman finalist at the end of the year. So, man, that's not even mentioning Bo Jackson, who is the Buckeyes running back. I don't think this game is going to be close. I think this is going to be the least close game of the second round. I think this is the team that's probably going to go on to win it all against the team that just of the remaining 8 doesn't have a chance. So my final score prediction for this game is going to be 24-3. And then moving on to the next game that I want to cover, Indiana versus Alabama. I'm going to cover these games as in the order of which game I think is going to be the least close to the closest. Um, so again, the next one is Indiana versus Alabama. Now, these two teams obviously came into the playoffs in two very different spots. Indiana, the only remaining undefeated team in the FBS, I'm pretty sure. No, they're definitely the only team remaining in the FBS that's undefeated. They didn't have to worry about that playoff spot. Won the Big Ten championship. Alabama, on the other hand, got smoked in the SEC title game by Georgia in their rematch. They obviously did beat Georgia earlier on this season, but they got smoked in the rematch. They stumbled to the finish line, I would say, of this season. They lost to Oklahoma by 2 points in the waning weeks of the season. They beat Auburn by only a touchdown. So, in essence, Alabama was just running out of gas the way it looked towards the end of the season until, they went down 17-0 against Oklahoma and Norman before, obviously, at the right time in the nick of time, their team woke up finally, scored 27 straight points, which was obviously key to their victory in that first round matchup. But ultimately, I don't think, even if they bring their A game, I don't think they have what it takes to beat Indiana. Indiana obviously has Kurt Signetti at the helm, one of one of the members of Nick Saban's coaching tree, which in this day and age in college football is basically a prerequisite to becoming a good coach if you think about it, right? Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning, Kurt Signetti, Sark, Lane Kiffin, all these guys that are um, some of the best coaches in the college football world. They they're from Nick Saban's coaching tree, and then other coaches like Kenny Dillingham, Tosh Lupoy. They were under guys like Dan Lanning, who were previously under Nick Saban. So Nick Saban's influence obviously spreads wide, and in this case, too, Kurt Cinetti, and combined with Fernando Mendoza, who can handle pressure as we saw against Ohio State, both literally and mentally, figuratively, he can handle pressure. Heisman Award winner. I think Indiana wins this one pretty cleanly. Although I do think Alabama will they'll bring a decent game. I don't think they're going to be the way they were when they went on that 27-point run against Oklahoma. I also don't think they're going to bring the team that got squashed by Georgia in the SEC title game. But I think that listen, they've been dropping passes left and right. If you watch the game against Oklahoma, it's pretty clear that this team just has butterfingers. Ryan Williams leads the way with, I'm not sure exactly how many drops for the whole season, but I know he leads the FBS in drops, which is pretty bad. And it wasn't just him that was dropping passes against Oklahoma. They're also 118th in the country in rushing yards per game. So when you combine that with a bunch of drop passes, I don't think it's just not going to fly against Indiana because Indiana has a top-notch defense. Them and Texas Tech are both of those teams are top three in both offensive and defenses. I want to say yards per game, but if you look it up on the NCAA site, you'll be able to find um, the stats that I'm talking about. Indiana's they're very good on both sides of the ball. Alabama is not. I don't think this game is super close. I think Indiana wins pretty cleanly. I think final score, I'm going to go 31-13 Indiana. And then now we're moving on to the next game. Now, the other two games I think are going to be very, very close. We're going to start with Georgia and Ole Miss. A lot of people might write off Ole Miss just because they don't have Lane Kiffin. We don't know really the team that Ole Miss is going to come out with. They dominated Tulane in the first round, and they look good under new head coach Pete Golding. Obviously, they still have their OC because Lane Kiffin let them return for the playoffs. So it's not like they're completely without any offensive game plan, despite not having Lane Kiffin. I think they're still going to be very good and very potent in this matchup against Georgia. But again, they're unpredictable. We don't know exactly how much the things are affecting Ole Miss. Is Lane Kiffin's departure hurting them, or has it actually helped them by putting a fire under their ass? And what about like the fact that like the positive momentum that they had before losing Lane Kiffin continued after they lost Lane Kiffin, although again, it's only one game. They haven't scored less than 30 points since their loss to Georgia earlier on this season. Actually, that was the start of their 30-point streak that has continued till now. They haven't won a game by less than 8 points since then. That was their last and only loss of the season was against Georgia earlier this season. That was a comeback victory for Georgia. Ole Miss, they led 35-26 heading into the fourth quarter, excuse me, and then Georgia, just came in roaring, 17 unanswered points, went on to win that game 43-35. So I think this is going to be a close game. Ole Miss is, as I said, unpredictable. Georgia, on the other hand, has pretty much steadily improved since that point of the season. That was, one of a few games around that time when they were stumbling. They almost lost to Auburn, almost lost to Florida, and then so that was pretty shaky. They barely beat Tennessee in overtime earlier that in the season. But then, later weeks beat both Texas and Alabama, dominating against both those top programs. So I think Georgia, they figured out a lot of the weaknesses that they had from earlier in the season. The main thing with Georgia and what's unpredictable, excuse me, about them is the fact that they might be a little rusty because they haven't played for, I think, over 3 weeks now. Whereas Ole Miss obviously had their first round game against Tulane. That I think is going to work in Ole Miss's favor, especially because no one really got hurt in that Ole Miss versus Tulane game, as at least not nothing too notable that I'm aware of. So I think this game is pretty close, just like the first one. I think. Listen, I would not be surprised if Ole Miss actually walks out with the victory because of the fact that Georgia has stumbled at times. Because Ole Miss did lead Georgia earlier this season, getting into the fourth quarter. And because of the fact that I don't think so far Lane Kiffin and his departure has affected Ole Miss too much. So I'm going to go with Georgia winning by a hair again. And I'm going to say it's going to be 34-30, Georgia coming out on top. Now we're going to go to the closest matchup of the second round. What I think is going to be the closest, and it's going to be Oregon versus Texas Tech. I think on basically the spreads. If you're into gambling, this is going to be the closest matchup as well. The closest predicted. Is that the right word? The matchup that is predicted to be the closest of the four in the second round. There we go. I think honestly, us as fans, we're in for a treat with this one. This one is going to be very close. On one side, Texas Tech, pretty much smooth sailing the whole season, other than their loss to Arizona State, where they didn't have their starting QB. They eviscerated the Big 12 runner-ups, which is BYU, not once but twice. They've also beaten Utah, which I believe was the third seed in the Big 12. So they pretty much dominated the Big 12. And as I mentioned earlier, they're one of two teams to be a top three scoring offense and a top three scoring defense. Now, okay, that was the exact stat that I meant to point out earlier: top three scoring offense and top three scoring defense. And then they'll meet another one-loss team, which is Oregon. Dan Lanning has been running a machine up in Eugene for the past few years. For the third year in a row, he's having a different but top-notch elite quarterback as his starting QB, and this year it's going to be Dante Moore, one of the best coaches in the country. Offense that can attack you in multiple ways. And then on the flip side, I would say, both these teams, I think, have what it takes to win it all. But also there's little things that you could pick out and go, I don't know. Does this team really have what it takes? So for Oregon, I would say it's their defense. If you watch the game against James Madison, they basically said, all right, we're going to win this game. This game's out of reach. And they stopped trying the second half. And then they gave up 28 points to James Madison in the second half, which was pretty ugly. And I'm surprised that as a part of Nick Saban's coaching tree, Dan Lanning, I mean, maybe he chewed them out behind the scenes, but I'm surprised we didn't get any angles of on the TV coverage of Dan Lanning just absolutely chewing the hell out of his defense. And then for Texas Tech and Oregon, they haven't been tested much as far as top 10 teams. Oregon, when they played Penn State, Penn State was I want to say a top four team. I think they were ranked number two, number three, maybe even number one at that point. And Oregon obviously beat them in the whiteout game. So it's obviously an impressive win. But Penn State, we came to find out, wasn't as good as we all thought at the beginning of the season. They played Indiana, lost by 10. That was their biggest, I would say their biggest test of the season, losing by 10. So that was a test, but other than that, they didn't really get tested too much. No one else within the top 10. Their other tests were James Madison, USC, who's number 16 now, and number 23 Iowa. Texas Tech, they played BYU, who's number 12 now, twice. They played number 15 Utah, beat all of them. Oregon beat all their opponents other than number one Indiana, of course, who's undefeated, as I mentioned before. So if you look at these teams, they both do have their weaknesses. Oregon is a little more battle tested, I say, than Texas Tech, but has what looked like a lazy defense in that second half of the last round. So we'll see what they come out with in the second round. And then Texas Tech, of course, not super battle tested. Big 12 isn't nearly as strong, at least at the top, as the Big 10 and the SEC. So we'll see how this goes. And this game is, I was going back and forth. I really don't know who's going to win this game. But I'm going to say if this game ends up being so close that it goes into overtime, and it's going to be Oregon 34, Texas Tech 32, in a double overtime thriller. I think Oregon's shown that they can handle the pressure, especially in whiteout. They've shown that they can handle overtime situations, handle the pressure, handle the noise, expectations, all that. I think they're going to come into the second round and take care of business, take care of Texas Tech, move on to play Indiana in that rematch in what would be the semifinal. This was fun to do. I always love offering predictions and stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and seeing these games play out. And yeah, it should be a good time. I'm gonna link my Instagram, all my socials down in the description. I'm gonna put as I did in the last video, I'm gonna also put a link to articles I write for the sports media website called The Lead. If you guys want to check that out, I'll have an article for basically this coming out. I don't know if it's going to be out when this releases. It may be. I'm not really sure. That's a toss up. But if you keep your eyes on that, there will be an article version of this coming out too. So again, follow my socials, check that out. Like, comment, share. Anything you guys could do would be greatly appreciated for this episode. Anything to help this video within the algorithm, which I'm starting to learn about a little bit. It's tricky, but yeah, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.